Imagine this. You wake up one morning, surrounded by people, coworkers, acquaintances, strangers brushing past on the street. Your phone buzzes with notifications, a message from a friend, a group chat alive with meaningless banner, a social media post gathering likes. Technically, you are connected to hundreds, maybe thousands, of people. And yet, as you step out into the world, an eerie realization settles over you. You feel alone. Not the kind of loneliness that comes from physical isolation, but a deeper, more insidious kind, the loneliness of being unseen, unheard, unknown. It's a peculiar paradox. In an era of hyperconnectivity, where communication is instant and the world is at your fingertips, true connection has never felt more out of reach. And so, you begin to wonder, why? Why is it that despite technological advancements, mental health awareness campaigns, and ever-growing culture of openness, people are lonelier than ever? Why does it feel as though we are exiles, not from a country, but from each other, from ourselves, from something fundamental and unseen? There was a time when loneliness was a physical reality. To be alone meant to be stranded, removed from the tribe, cut off from survival itself. But now, loneliness exists not in the absence of people, but in their presence. It festers in crowded rooms, lurks behind curated smiles, hides within hollow conversations that skim the surface of something deeper, something few dare to reach for. We were promised a world where connection would be effortless, where friendships could be formed with a tap of a button, where the barriers of time and distance would crumble under the weight of technology. But instead of deeper bonds, we have more fragile ones. Instead of genuine understanding, we have shallow validation. Instead of soul-nourishing conversations, we have a never-ending stream of noise. And so, the question lingers, how do we arrive here? What happened to us? Was it always meant to be this way, or did some unseen force, push us into exile? A force that no one speaks of, yet all feel its weight. A force that lulls us into believing that we are more connected than ever, even as we drift further apart. Perhaps the answer lies not in what we have gained, but in what we have lost. The loss of true community. The loss of deep, undistracted presence. The loss of meaning in an age that prioritizes stimulation over depth. Or perhaps, the real loss is far more personal. A slow, imperceptible erosion of the self. Because what if loneliness isn't just about the absence of others? What if the greatest exile is not from society, but from your own soul? And if that is true, then how do you return? Loneliness is not merely an emotion. It is a condition of existence, a quiet, gnawing sensation that something is missing, something just beyond reach. Most never question it. They treat it as a phase, an unfortunate byproduct of circumstance, something to be fixed with another social event, another distraction, another hit of dopamine from the endless scroll of digital validation. But what if loneliness is not something to be cured, but something to be understood? What if modern society, with all its conveniences, has not solved loneliness but manufactured it? To understand this exile of the soul, we must look deeper, beyond social media, beyond technology, beyond the surface-level explanations that tell us we are simply not trying hard enough to connect. We must go to the root, the fractured self, how modernity divided us from ourselves. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, and exile into the unconscious. He believed that true psychological wholeness could only be achieved by reintegrating these lost fragments of self. But modern life has done the opposite. From an early age, we are conditioned to fracture. We learn that certain parts of us are acceptable while others are shameful. We are told to suppress our anger, to silence our sadness, to wear a mask of perpetual confidence even when we are drowning inside. The parts of us that feel deeply, that question too much, that hunger for something beyond the material, they are pushed into exile. And so, we become strangers to ourselves. What remains is a hollow identity, one carefully curated to fit within the societal machine. A machine that values productivity over presence, image over substance, efficiency over authenticity. But there is a cost to this self-betrayal. When we lose touch with who we truly are, we also lose the ability to truly connect with others. How can we form deep relationships when we ourselves are fractured? How can we expect to be understood when we no longer understand ourselves. This is the first exile, the exile of the self, the death of true community, how society replaced meaning with convenience. Nietzsche warned of a coming crisis, a time when traditional values would erode, leaving a void in their place. He called it the death of God, not as a literal claim, but as a metaphor for the loss of shared meaning. He feared that, in its absence, society would replace depth with distractions, purpose with pleasure, and connection with convenience. He was right. For most of human history, survival depended on true community. Bonds were forged not through mere socialization, but through necessity, shared struggle, and collective purpose. But modern society has done something unprecedented. It has made survival independent of deep human connection. You no longer need a tribe to gather food, build shelter, or defend against threats. Everything is outsourced, automated, delivered to your doorstep with the click of a button. In theory, this should be progress. In reality, it has left people adrift, detached from the fundamental human need for meaningful belonging. The modern individual floats through life surrounded by acquaintances, colleagues, and fleeting digital interactions. But how many can truly say they belong to something greater than themselves? How many can say they are known, not just by name, but in soul? This is the second exile, the exile from true community, the illusion of connection, how technology created a new kind of isolation. All this, Huxley once envisioned a world where people would be so entertained that they would no longer realize they were enslaved. Unlike Orwell's vision of a dystopia ruled by fear, Huxley warned a more insidious fate, a world in which people were kept docile by pleasure, distraction, and empty stimulation. Look around. We live in an age where connection is instant, yet intimacy is rare, where millions can interact online, yet loneliness is an epidemic, where people present the illusion of a perfect life, yet suffer in silence behind the screen. Technology promised to bring us closer, but in reality, it has placed a glass wall between us. Social media has turned relationships into performances. Conversations have become transactional, stripped of vulnerability, depth, and presence. And the cruelest part? Most don't even realize they are lonely. They mistake likes for love, comments for companionship, entertainment for meaning. And so they numb themselves. A new notification, a new binge-worthy show, a new purchase to chase away the emptiness, if only for a moment. But the moment passes, and the loneliness returns. This is a third exile, the exile from real connection, the unspoken truth, the loneliness no one admits. Few will say it out loud, because to admit loneliness is to admit vulnerability. It is to confess that despite the carefully curated persona, despite the busyness, despite the illusion of connection, something is missing. And so people pretend. They pretend they are fulfilled. They pretend their relationships are deep. They pretend they don't long for something more. But the truth lingers unspoken, a quiet ache beneath the surface, a feeling that something has been lost. But what if this exile is not permanent? What if the loneliness that haunts modern life is not a life sentence, but a call to action? What if the very pain of disconnection is the key to rediscovering something greater? Because here's the secret. Loneliness is not just suffering. It is also a signal that something in you is still alive, still searching, still unwilling to settle for the shallow substitutes that society offers. And that realization, that is the first step toward breaking free. Loneliness is often dismissed as a personal struggle, a passing emotion that one must simply get over. But what if it is far more than that? What if loneliness is not just an individual affliction, but a symptom of something deeper, something that is silently reshaping the world around us? Most people never stop to consider the true cost of this unseen epidemic. They feel its weight, but they do not see the chains. They live with its consequences, but they do not recognize its source. And so they continue navigating a society that has normalized their suffering, unaware that this disconnection is not just harming individuals, but warping the very fabric of human existence. But make no mistake, this exile has consequences, and they are far more dangerous than anyone dares to admit. A society built on isolation, how loneliness became the new normal. For centuries, philosophers and psychologists have warned of the dangers of disconnection, not just from others, but from meaning itself. Nietzsche foresaw the rise of the last man, a hollow individual, numbed by comfort and distracted by trivial pleasures, unable to feel anything beyond momentary gratification. Carl Jung spoke of mass-mindedness, a condition in which individuals, having lost a deep connection to themselves, become easily manipulated by collective thought, sacrificing personal depth for the illusion of belonging. And Aldous Huxley, in his prophetic vision of the future, predicted that people will be so entertained, so sedated by shallow pleasures, that they would no longer recognize their own enslavement. We are living in their warnings. We have become a society that thrives on loneliness, a system that needs people to be disconnected, because disconnected people are easier to control. Think about it. What kind of person is most susceptible to advertising? The one who feels whole, who has a deep sense of purpose, or the one who feels a quiet emptiness inside, looking for something, anything to fill it? What kind of person is easiest to manipulate politically? The one who has strong, genuine relationships, or the one who feels isolated, angry, and desperate for a sense of belonging, even if it means clinging to a false identity? What kind of person is most willing to accept a life of quiet mediocrity? The one who feels truly connected, alive, and inspired, or the one who has been numbed into submission, pacified by routine and distraction? Loneliness is not just an epidemic. It is an industry, and the world profits from it. The psychological toll, how loneliness rewires the brain. But the damage is not just societal. It is neurological. Loneliness is not just an emotion. It is a biological signal, as real and urgent as hunger or thirst. It tells your body that something is wrong, that you are in danger, that you are in some way dying. Studies show that chronic loneliness triggers the same stress responses as physical pain. It increases cortisol levels, weakens the immune system, and even accelerates cognitive decline. Neuroscientists have found that prolonged isolation literally rewires the brain, shrinking the areas responsible for empathy and deep thinking, making people more reactive, more anxious, more fearful. And fear is the perfect tool for control, because fearful people do not ask deep questions. They do not rebel. They do not seek truth. They simply obey. The emotional cost. Why relationships are becoming more superficial. You've seen it. Conversations that never go beyond surface-level pleasantries. Friendships built on shared distractions rather than shared understanding. Romantic relationships that are fragile, fleeting, devoid of true depth. This is not an accident. When a society normalizes disconnection, people forget what real connection feels like. They settle for less. They lower their standards. They mistake attention for affection, validation for intimacy. And so, relationships suffer. People no longer truly see each other. They see projections of what they want the other person to be. They see masks, carefully curated identities, highlights, not depths. And when reality fails to match the illusion, they leave, because no one ever taught them how to stay, how to build something real, how to endure the discomfort of true connection, the vulnerability, the rawness, the willingness to be fully seen. And so, people cycle through relationships like they cycle through social media posts, always seeking, never satisfied, not realizing that the problem was never the other person. The problem was that they forgot how to connect in the first place. The spiritual cost, the loss of something deeper. But perhaps the greatest consequence of this exile is something even more intangible, something that cannot be measured in studies or statistics, something that is felt only in quiet moments, when the distractions fade, when the noise dies down, when there is nothing left but the silence of one's own existence. Call it meaning, call it soul, call it whatever you want. But something has been lost, a connection not just to people, but to something greater. For centuries, human beings found meaning in something beyond themselves, through faith, through philosophy, through deep introspection, through pursuit of wisdom that stretched beyond material success. But modern life has stripped this away. We are taught to worship efficiency, not wisdom, productivity, not presence, comfort, not depth, and so people drift through life untethered. They chase happiness in external things, never realizing that happiness was never meant to be the goal. It was meant to be a byproduct, of deep purpose, of struggle, of connection, of something that reaches beyond the self. But without that, all that remains is emptiness. The breaking point, when loneliness becomes rebellion. But here's the truth. This exile is not sustainable. A society built on loneliness cannot last, because the soul, no matter how suppressed, no matter how silenced, will always seek its way back. There is a breaking point, a moment when the distractions lose their power, a moment when people wake up and realize that what they have been given is not enough, that something deeper exists. And in that moment, loneliness transforms into something else. It becomes a spark, a fire, a quiet rebellion against a world that has tried to keep people numb, disconnected, asleep. But awakening is not easy. It requires something radical, something that most fear. It requires unlearning everything you were taught about connection, meaning, and belonging. It requires a rebellion. There comes a moment when the weight of loneliness is no longer bearable. A moment when you realize that no amount of distraction, entertainment, or surface-level connection will ever be enough. You see it in the faces of those around you. People drifting through life, talking but never truly speaking, surrounded yet utterly alone. You feel in yourself a quiet, restless ache, a yearning for something real, something that matters. And in that moment, you have a choice. You can numb yourself, or you can rebel. But this is not the kind of rebellion society expects. This is not the cheap rebellion of social media outrage, the performative defiance of those who scream but never change. This is a deeper rebellion, one that does not seek external validation, one that cannot be bought or sold. This is a rebellion of the soul, the rebellion that begins with a single realization. You were never meant to live like this. The first step, abandon the illusion of connection. The first act of rebellion is the hardest, letting go of the illusion that busyness equals meaning, the illusion that social media equals connection, the illusion that being surrounded by people means you are not alone. Because as long as you believe these lies, you will remain trapped, chasing a mirage, mistaking empty interactions for intimacy, mistaking validation for love. But here's the truth. Real connection is rare. Most conversations are shallow. Most relationships are transactional. Most people are too afraid to be vulnerable, too afraid to be seen as they truly are. But you do not have to be like them. The moment you stop chasing false connection, you create space for something real. You learn to sit in solitude without fear. You learn to choose depth over quantity, silence over meaningless noise. And in that silence, something begins to shift. For the first time, you begin to hear your own voice again. The second step, reclaim the lost parts of yourself. You were not always like this. There was a time before the masks, before the conditioning, before the world told you who you were supposed to be. But piece by piece, you were broken apart. You were told that certain emotions were too much, that certain dreams were unrealistic, that certain truths should never be spoken aloud. So you buried them. You learned to be acceptable instead of authentic. And in doing so, you lost yourself. But the self you lost is not gone. It waits in the shadows. Carl Jung called this the shadow self, the parts of you that have been repressed, hidden, denied, the anger you were told to suppress, the passions you abandoned, the deep, existential questions you silenced in order to fit in. To reclaim yourself, you must go into darkness. You must face the parts of yourself that scare you. You must allow yourself to feel what you have avoided feeling. And in doing so, you will realize something shocking. The loneliness you have felt was never just about other people. It was about being disconnected from yourself. And once you begin to heal that fracture, the world begins to change. The third step, seek depth over distraction. We live in an era of distraction. Every second of every day, you are bombarded with things designed to keep you numb. Endless content, instant gratification, cheap dopamine hits that keep you from ever sitting with your own thoughts. But distraction is a trap, because the more you consume, the less you create. The more you react, the less you reflect. The more you escape, the further you drift from yourself. Rebelling against this requires a radical act. Choosing depth. Choosing books over mindless scrolling. Choosing silence over background noise. choosing to be present with another human being instead of checking your phone every 5 minutes. Most will not do this. Most are too afraid of what they will find in the silence. But those who dare, they begin to wake up. They begin to see the world differently. And they begin to build something real. The fourth step, find a few who are awake. Not everyone will understand this path. Many will think you are strange for rejecting the shallow comforts they cling to. They will tell you that you are being dramatic, that you should just go out more, that you are overthinking things. They do not realize they are trapped. But there are others. There are those who have also felt the quiet ache of something missing. Those who have asked the deeper questions. Those who are seeking something real. Find them. They will not be the loudest voices in the room. They will not be the ones chasing popularity, status, or mindless pleasure. But when you meet them, you will know. Because when you speak, they will listen, not just to your words, but to the spaces between them. Because they, too, have walked through the loneliness. They, too, have chosen the harder path. And when you find them, you will realize that true connection still exists. Not in the places society told you to look. Not in the noise, but in the silence. Not in the many, but in the few. The fifth step, embrace the beauty of solitude. Most people fear being alone. They treat solitude as something to be avoided at all costs, as if silence itself is dangerous. But solitude is not loneliness. Solitude is where you find yourself. It is where you strip away the noise, the conditioning, the expectations, and finally hear your own voice again. It is where you remember who you were before the world told you who to be. It is where you cultivate the kind of inner strength that makes you untouchable. Because the truth is this: a person who has made peace with solitude can never be controlled. They do not seek validation, because they already know their worth. They do not fear rejection, because they have already accepted themselves. They do not crave endless distractions, because they are at peace in their own mind. And that is true freedom. The rebellion is not for everyone, but it is for you. Most people will not take this path. They will continue to live in quiet exile, pretending they are fine, distracting themselves until there is nothing left. But you are different, because if you weren't, you would not have read this far. Somewhere inside you, something is already awakened. Something in you knows that you were meant for more. And now you have a choice. You can continue as before, numbing the ache, following the script society has given you. Or you can step into the unknown. You can reclaim yourself. You can build something real. You can wake up. At some point in your journey, you will look back and realize something unsettling. The world did not change. Society is still the same. The distractions, the emptiness, the mindless chase for validation, all of it still exists. But you have changed. And because you have changed, you can no longer see the world the same way. This is a final and most difficult realization. Loneliness was never just a curse. It was an initiation, a brutal, necessary initiation into a deeper truth, one that most people will never understand: the price of awakening. When you were lost in the illusions of modern society, loneliness felt like suffering. But now, you see it for what it truly was: a teacher. Because only through solitude do you learn who you really are. Only through the pain of disconnection do you realize what truly matters. Only through the exile of the soul do you discover the path back to yourself. But there's a price for this knowledge. You will no longer be able to relate to most people. You will no longer be able to tolerate meaningless conversations, mindless distractions, or the endless cycle of shallow pursuits. You will see things others do not see. You will feel things others avoid. And you will understand why so many people fear waking up. Because once you awaken, there is no going back. The paradox of freedom. At first, this realization may feel like another kind of loneliness. You may ask yourself, if I no longer fit into the world as it is, where do I belong? But here is the paradox. The moment you stop searching for belonging, you find it, not in the approval of the masses, not in the shallow acceptance of those who do not understand you, but in something far greater, in the connection between kindred spirits, those rare few who have also walked this path, in the unshakable bond you form with yourself, the self you abandoned, the self you reclaimed. In the realization that you do not need the world's permission to exist fully, you are no longer waiting to be seen. You are no longer waiting to be saved. You are no longer waiting for the world to give you a place, because you have already found it within yourself. What comes next? Most people spend their lives running from loneliness. You have faced it. Most people live and die as fragments of themselves. You are whole again. Most people will never understand what you now know, and that is not your burden, because the final truth is this: the world is lonely because people are disconnected from themselves. But those who dare to seek the truth, those who dare to endure the exile and return stronger, they are the ones who change everything. They are the ones who bring depth into a shallow world. They are the ones who remind others that something real still exists. They are the ones who, even in solitude, are never truly alone. And now you are one of them. So the real question is not, how do I escape loneliness? The real question is, what will you do with the freedom you have found?